Thank you, Julie, and good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, I should say. Wow, the day is flying by. Good afternoon. UCLA Health is super honored to be part of this Healthy Living series, and thank you all for joining us today. We know that there are lots of topics that are top of mind for everyone, and so thank you for taking 30 minutes out of your day and joining us to get some what we believe is really valuable information. And we have the honor today to have Dr. Cole Liberator with us. He is a pulmonologist with UCLA Health and is in our Torrance office on Sky Park Drive. If you have never seen a pulmonologist, these are the guys that are the airway experts. You've probably heard a lot about them in the news lately with all of the health information that's been shared. These guys are frontline for any and all airway topics. And so with today's topic being air quality, it is a fantastic opportunity for us to hear from truly an expert in this area. And so with that, let me just quickly hand off to Dr. Liberator.
Thanks so much, Jack. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. I am going to share my screen and we can start. All right. Can you see the screen okay? I'm gonna say.
Yes. Yep.
Yep. Okay, great. Okay, so my talk today is air quality, what are the risks and how to protect yourself. I'm gonna go over three major things today. First, just a review of air pollution, what it's comprised of, overall risks associated with the components of air pollution and what the government community is doing to regulate those risks. Talk a little bit about how we've been doing as a community in LA, and then in the past, and also how we've been doing more recently. And then we'll talk a little bit about your ability to minimize your overall risk. So, there are a variety of major pollutants that can really affect your overall health. For the sake of this talk, I'm really going to focus on particulate matter, especially one called PM 2.5. So I'll delve into that into more detail in the next couple slides, but let me just go over a couple of the other pollutants that you may have heard of very briefly. The first one is ozone. So this is a gas composed of basically 3 atoms of oxygen. They're kind of good and bad ozone. So the ozone that protects kind of the stratosphere, or that lines the stratosphere, protects us from UV radiation. There's also ozone, kind of ground level ozone that we associated with smog that can be pretty dangerous, can lead to bronchial wall constriction, worsening asthma exacerbations, and overall kind of progression of lung disease. There's also some association with overall mortality trends and rising ozone. Carbon monoxide, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. It's a colorless, odorless gas created when fossil fuels are burned. And this, as it builds up in the blood system, it can actually lead to confusion, dizziness, and sometimes death. Both sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide are from usually industrial facilities, power plants, and basically can be associated actually with particulate matter and lead to worsening respiratory symptoms. So particulate matter is really the big one that we truly worry about as far as air pollution. PM 2.5 specifically is the most dangerous. When we talk about particulate matter, it's basically a combination of fine inhaled particles, combination of combustion particles, organic compounds, and the 2.5 or PM 10.5, they all correlate to actually the size of the particle. And really the smaller the particle, the more damaging it can be, because when you inhale these particles, the smaller ones get really deep into the lungs and sometimes can actually get into the bloodstream and cause a lot of long-term health conditions. And notably, this is actually the primary pollutant when we talk about wildfire pollution. So PM 2.5 and health, there's been a lot of great studies looking at correlating basically air pollution, PM 2.5, and your overall health. The WHO estimates roughly 4.2 million premature deaths worldwide were associated with PM 2.5. Of those, about 200,000 were in the US. And short-term exposure is actually also dangerous. There's some studies that I'll touch on a little bit later suggesting that even a couple days worth of significant PM 2.5 exposure can really have long-term effects on your health. It's important to identify the at-risk population for this pollution, and that's really the elderly, over 65, anyone with chronic lung or heart disease, children, and then pregnant women. Children especially because it can really impair lung growth. And it's one of the major causes of non-smoking COPD. So, how does the government involved in air pollution? Because they're the big sort of regulators of this, and it's really the EPA that really works to regulate this. And in 1970 was a pretty monumental year for government regulation of air quality. So the EPA was formed at that time. The Clean Air Act was formed, which was really a landmark piece of legislature. It created the National Ambient Air Quality Standards and started to federally regulate emissions. There have been multiple amendments to this, but one of the most important was the Clean Air Act of 1990, and it's really expand the oversight of the government and authority over emission control. Also established a program to phase out chemicals that depleted the ozone layer. So because of that, the EPA has really set standards for PM2 levels that it deems sort of safe. And sets goals for different state governments to get their PM2 or other pollutant levels below. So this is just a graph of PM2 levels and standards that the EPA set over time. And as you can see, there's a trend towards reducing PM2 levels over time. So in 1997, kind of just going through this graph, the y-axis is PM2 levels, the x-axis is years, and the blue bars are annual PM2 levels, and the darker bars are 24-hour PM2 levels. Both of them are regulated by the EPA. 1997, they allowed up to 65 micrograms per milliliter cubed, and that's gone down pretty dramatically over time. 2012 was the last time that they made changes. You can see on the right the specific changes. So the goal or the recommendation by the EPA, the level of 12 micrograms per year, and a daily maximum level of 35. Interestingly, this is kind of debated. So compare this to sort of the WHO, which actually recommends a slightly lower level of 10 yearly and daily 25. So it is kind of a moving target. How this translates to what we see and probably what a lot of you have noticed in various websites or on television, how we talk about air quality is really through this air quality index. So there's a range of kind of air quality levels that are described anywhere from good, green to hazardous or the maroon color. And these numbers, these values that correlate with it are not actually, they don't really correlate to an actual measurement. It's just a range of values that they attribute to any specific pollutant. So for PM 2.5, which is what we were talking about, these are the actual it should be PM 2.5 levels associated with the different colors. So if we track back to what we saw on the last slide, from an EPA standpoint, they use the cutoff between yellow and orange as far as the levels on a daily basis that they deem dangerous. But there's the question of really, is there any safe threshold for PM2 levels? And this is an area of active research, but there's some data recently that suggests that maybe there isn't. So this is a study from 2017. Which basically looked at your relative risk of overall mortality associated with PM2 levels in a pretty rural area with overall kind of low daily PM 2.5 levels. And what I highlighted here is the area of sort of pretty low PM 2.5 from 0 to 12.5, which is much less than the daily recommended level. And here you can see a pretty close correlation to overall mortality and this low level. And again, this is pretty small. This is 1%, but it's there and it's noticeable. And I think it's definitely a big issue that the government is really trying to wrestle with, and a lot of scientists these days. So that's a little bit about kind of air pollution in general and levels. What about how we've been doing? So as I'm sure a lot of people know, Los Angeles and air quality often have not gone hand to hand. LA County is been one of the most polluted cities in the US over the past 50 years. That picture on the right is a picture of LA in the 1950s. Unfortunately, the yearly levels of PM2.5 are actually have always exceeded the standards that the EPA has recommended. And this is really caused by a couple things. Primarily, it's cars and shipping, but wildfires do have a role to play. And then geography actually also does too. Kind of the way LA is set up in a sort of a basin area, air, it's a little bit hard for air to escape. And so sometimes the pollutants can hang out a little bit longer than other places. But there is good news, and the good news is LA and California in general has been doing a lot better over the past 10 years. So this is a graph of your yearly PM2 levels, PM2 levels on the y-axis, and then years on the x-axis. And as you can see, there's been a dramatic decline in the yearly PM2 levels, 2.5 levels over time. And the blue line, the light blue line is the Los Angeles levels, and then that dark blue line is the EPA standard at 12.5. So, we're pretty close right now. We're getting there, almost hitting the recommendation. And with these changes, we've seen some really impressive health benefits, especially in the LA area. So this is another really great epidemiologic study looking at the association between air quality and lung growth. So what they did was this group looked at basically 3 cohorts or groups of children, ages 11 through 15, in 5 different Southern California communities. And they looked at annual lung function, and they compared that to pollution levels. So the graph on the right, what you can see more broadly is over the years, the PM 2.5 levels have gone down pretty dramatically in all 5 of the communities. And when they looked at lung function in relation to that, it seemed like there was a reducing pollution improved overall lung function. So in these two bar graphs, just going through it, the different colored graphs relate to specific cohorts or groups of children, green being the most recent group of children. And the y-axis on both graphs show overall proportion of low lung function. So the higher the bar, the worse the lung function overall in the kids. And as you can see, the green across the board is much better than orange or blue. And it's really an impressive improvement, and it's a kind of a testament to some of the great work California and Los Angeles have been doing in improving air quality. What if we get more, granular and look on a daily level? There is data out there that you can actually look at. The EPA at epa.gov will tell you every single PM 2.5 level per day. And as you can see overall, I think the trends in the years are we're getting to continue to slowly improve. But I wanted to highlight a couple areas that are kind of interesting over the past year. So in 2020, I'll blow this up a little bit. You can basically see there are a couple interesting trends. One in March, right? There's a dramatic, and this green correlates to that AQI or air quality index that we talked about previously. So green is good, yellow or red is worse. We had one of the most impressive runs in March of great air quality that Los Angeles has seen in decades. And then also interestingly, in September, we had probably one of the worst runs of air quality. And I don't think it's, you don't need a doctor to tell you why these things occurred, but yeah, it's a pretty interesting kind of epidemiologic study. So the 2020 lockdown really improved air quality. So there was a 20% improvement in overall AQI in Los Angeles, and an overall 40% drop in PM 2.5. And, I think this really speaks to, this is reversible and manageable to some point, and it really sets a point that we can strive to be better. On the flip side, wildfires, as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced, have really taken a toll on the air quality of the area around September, especially, and it kind of hints at a worrisome trend overall. So there's been a slow increase in frequency and duration of fires since the mid-1980s. The picture on the right is an aerial view of the Camp Fire fire in 1980, which at that point was the biggest wildfire in Los Angeles or California history, and actually the most financially damaging disaster in 2018. You know, this year we've had historic California fire season with certain areas, not LA specifically, but closer to the fires. It showed a PM2.5 level as high as about 500, which is really, really impressive and a little worrisome. You know, I think wildfires in general can really be can be a part of the PM 2.5 story. It's nowhere near on a daily basis as dramatic as the PM2 kind of levels related to cars or industrial exposure. But bad fires can play a large role. So this is a map looking at basically wildfire prone areas with worsening air quality. And what they looked at was they looked at the 20 days every year where PM 2.5 levels are the worst throughout the country. And they've noticed that over the years, those days are getting better and better as we go along. And I think a lot of that is because the emissions in cars are getting better. But there's a worrisome area in the Northwest where the PM2 levels on those really bad days are even worse than before. And a lot of that is from the wildfires. And so I think it's the fact that wildfires especially can play a big role in overall air quality. All right, so what about to minimize your own risk, which I think is really important. I think the first thing is monitoring your air quality. So there are a lot of great websites that really do a great job of tracking overall air quality. So this is a view from the EPA website, airnow.gov, where you can see areas of varying air quality. They show smoke trends, and you can even see areas where there are actual fires. IQ Air is not a governmented site, but it's a really nice site where it's maybe a little more user friendly, and they do a great job of giving you a lot of good data. This is from IQ Air. It's a really nice, easy interface, right, where you can see the AQI as moderate here, and it also shows the overall actual PM 2.5 level. There are a bunch of apps you can find too, which allow you to kind of track the daily levels. EPA offers one. Air Visual is a really nice app as well. I think this is, this is one of the key parts really reducing your risk is monitoring the overall air quality. And then the other big thing is knowing your risk, right? Who is at high risk? I touched on this earlier, but children with developing lungs, right, and people who are described as, a little bit elderly or greater than 65 definitely have increased risk. People with specific medical conditions, right? And so COPD, asthma, chronic bronchitis, heart disease, and significant allergies can really feel even somewhat milder increase in air quality or worsening of air quality are much more sensitive to it. And then also pregnancy. What about what can you do in your home environment? I think that's another big part, right? So I think if there's there's a time period, right, where there's specifically elevated or significantly elevated smoke, the biggest thing I can recommend is stay indoors to reduce your overall activity. But not just staying indoors is important. You need to really make sure that your home is well equipped to reduce your exposure. And that involves really closing your windows or doors, making sure there's really not a lot of leakage from the outside. If you do have an air conditioner, which is actually pretty helpful, or central air, make sure it recirculates the air, right, and doesn't take it from the outside environment. These type of techniques can usually reduce the overall or improve the overall air quality by at least 50%, usually more compared to the outdoor environment. Reduce other sources of indoor air pollution, obvious stuff like don't smoke cigarettes in the house. If you have a wood or gas burning stove, that's a no-no when the air quality is significant. And then the other key thing is, usually if you do have, if there's significant wildfire or the air quality is poor, there'll be periods of bad air quality, and then there'll be, good periods. And I think really taking advantage of those good periods and airing out your home when the air quality improves is really important. Cleaning the rooms, so a lot of the PM2.5 particles can kind of rest as kind of dust, a very small dust form. And so cleaning rooms with a damp cloth or mop is really important. And kind of alternatively, avoiding vacuuming unless you have a kind of a HEPA filter, a very strong filter, is important because that can actually kick up the dust and make things worse. So what is a HEPA filter, or how do I know my filtration systems are good? The thing I would really stress is these MERV ratings. You can find this on the EPA, but MERV is really described as minimum efficiency reporting valve, and it always, every single filter system or air conditioning or even some vacuums should have these certain ratings on them, and it really gives you a lot of information on how good of a filtration system you have. And what you really want to shoot for is this high or HEPA filtration system. And why that's important is based on how well it can remove the particulate matter size that we're looking for. So again, PM 2.5, right? 2.5 micrometers, so that's in the 1 to 3 range. And with a high or HEPA filter level of filtration, you get at least greater than 85% of the filtration. And I think if you can, going for a HEPA filtration is the most important thing. So what about air cleaners and purifiers? We get a lot of questions about this. Central air cleaners are nice, can be a little expensive and can require installation. Room air cleaners are a great option. I think just understanding the ability and limitations of the cleaner you have are really important. And you really need to specify the room size and make sure the cleaner is effective for that room size. And then also look at the clean air delivery rate. So this is a rate that usually most of the filters will have on their instructions, or and it really correlates with the higher number of the better, and it really correlates the efficiency of the filtration rate and the overall efficacy of the device. If you have any questions, there's a great website that I listed at the bottom that really just basically outlines all the different certified air cleaners that California has kind of given the okay for. The one thing I will say is avoid air cleaners that produce ozone. So there are actually some cleaners, usually electronic cleaners, that will actually produce a low level of ozone that can be obviously pretty damaging. So California in general does not allow them, but sometimes things go through the cracks. The other big thing that that everybody's talking about, that the whole country is talking about, is masks. So, I'm not going to touch on the mask specifically for COVID. This is a little bit different, but masks for filtering out particulate matter and pollution really involve basically what we call particulate respirator. The two most common are N95s and P100s. And the N95 and 100 just, those numbers correlate to the percentage of particulates that are filtered out at a very low level. So, and to be honest with you, the difference between 95 and 100 is probably pretty negligible, and based mainly on how well you're able to fit the mask to your face, which is a crucial part of this. I think that the CDC has a lot of great videos to kind of show you how to correctly fit your mask, but which is so important if you're thinking about using a mask. And there are a couple things on the specific mask that I would just recommend looking at to ensure the quality of it. One of them is the fact that it has to be NIOSH approved. It's a government entity that basically regulates masks. You always want to look at the filter efficiency, right? So the N95 right there, and then just confirm that there's an actual certificate number. As far as who needs a mask, I'm not going to give too many recommendations here because it's pretty personal. I would probably recommend you follow up with your primary care physician about your overall risk and the need for a specific mask. And then finally, I'll just touch really quickly on consumer air sensors. So there are a lot of air sensors that you can purchase actually in the home right now that are of pretty varied efficacy, and it's tough. It's kind of a buyer beware type of situation. They actually don't measure the actual particles like a lot of government sensors do. They actually measure basically light. It's basically the light that reflects off of the particles. So it's an indirect measurement, and with that, it's fraught with issues. I looked at a couple studies in reviewing this talk that kind of reviewed and compared a bunch of different air sensors on the market right now. I listed 4 right there: Air Beam, Visual, Fubu, and Purple Air 2, which probably got the best reviews. So if you're looking, in the market for it, but even then, it's a little varied. I'd probably direct you, if you're really interested in taking a deep dive into this, into the Air Sensor Toolbox at EPA.gov. They actually went through and looked at how a bunch of consumer air sensors compared to their kind of government qualified air sensors. It's a great tool for so you're really informed if you're interested in purchasing one of these. There's a lot of also kind of portable sensors that are offered right now, and I'll be honest, there's very limited data there, and so it's hard to really make a recommendation around that. And so in summary, air pollution, especially PM 2.5, remains a significant cause of morbidity and mortality, both in the US and worldwide. Wildfires can rapidly worsen air quality and can be a big part of the morbidity around it in certain areas. There are many ways to reduce your overall exposure. I think the keys really are monitoring overall air quality, knowing your personal risk, and then trying to maximize your home air quality overall. And then a quick shout out to happy birthday to Clean Air Act. It's been 50 years since the Air Act was enacted, and it's really been a huge benefit to the overall air quality of the country. If you're interested a little bit more in some of the advocacy around the Air Act, it's still very much a fight and debate in government these days. Lung.org and EPA.gov have a lot of great information there. So that's about all I have as far as my talk today. So I'd love to, hear any questions or that anyone has about air quality. Thank you.
Yes, we do, Doctor. Got some great questions coming in. Thank you. I'm just going to start running them off here and see what we can get through. One of the attendees said, for air quality, I keep a humidifier running at night in my bedroom and a HEPA air filter running during the daytime. Yet sometimes my nasal breathing seems sporadically blocked. Could this be related to the recent California fires and smoky atmospheric allergies causing this? Normally, I'm healthy even with my cardio meds.
Yeah, I mean, it can be that I would say in general, humidifier itself isn't great as far as air quality filtration overall. It can moisten the air, which can be good for your nasal passages. But the HEPA filter, if we're worried about air quality, is really where I would go with. So especially if you're having symptoms at night, if that's the big concern about the nasal congestion, maybe moving the HEPA filter in the room would really mitigate any issue with air quality specifically. I think the other thing that I touched on in the talk is really just making sure other simple things like keeping your windows closed at night if you're worried about that, making sure there aren't any major cracks between the windows, doors closed, that type of stuff can actually make a pretty big difference too.
Great. How safe is living near a facility like ExxonMobil where flare-ups are quite common and the schools have lockdowns covering the windows and doors with masking tape?
It's a loaded question there. So I think I think you have to be pretty aware of the air quality. I know they have sensors, air quality sensors around there, and the levels are high, which sure, and on certain days they definitely are. Then that's tough, right? Then I think you really have to be cognizant of your overall risk, especially with kids. It's a big issue. I can't speak to the specific, AQI index around where you're at, but that's a big issue. There've been studies that there's a Danish study from a couple of years ago looking at mortality or even COPD rates related to kind of how close you are to a freeway, right? And people had kind of worsening asthma exacerbations, maybe worsening rates of COPD, and there's trends towards worsening mortality and freeways. So if you extrapolate that to areas where there's a lot of kind of pollutant, it's a big issue.
Definitely. We have a runner who wants to know what is considered unsafe, what PM 2.5 level is considered unsafe for running.
Yeah, it's hard to give you a black and white about that because it depends a lot on you, right? So if and your age and your risks. Just to maybe give an example. So if you're not above 65, if you don't have any chronic lung disease or any type of heart-related disease, you're pretty active and run. Usually in the yellow range, yellow or green is usually okay. I think that's a general statement. Each person reacts to things a little differently. Once you get to that orange range, especially if you're working and you're really an active runner, I'd be a little cautious because when you're breathing and you're exercising, you're taking in about 10 to 20 times more air than you would just normally walking. And so with that, the exposure definitely goes up. The hard thing, and it's something you really have to balance in Los Angeles, because as you probably saw on that heat map, the majority of days are yellow, right? Which correlates to not EPA considered dangerous, but still significant in LA. So it's a bit of a gray area. I think it depends on your risks, but I would say the orange is where I would start to get worried for someone that doesn't really have any risks.
That's good. You touched on wearing masks,
Yeah.
but one person wants to know about, well, if the smoke is getting into your house, do you recommend that they actually wear like an N95 mask in their house?
I'd recommend an air filter first. I think the data around air filters is better than masks. I know it's hard sometimes. I mean, I think the wait time to get air filters these days is tough, but the quality and the ability to remove particles with the air filter is much better. Masks in general, they're good. They're okay. I think the mask itself is so dependent on the fit, right? And how well you can seal it to your face. And, there are some guidelines like the CDC will kind of show you how to do it, but there are even a couple steps on top of that. So when we get fitted for masks, right, it's a little more official. They actually put us in this basically like tube almost, and they spray these irritants to make sure that our seal is good. So I think masks can be a nice add-on, but I think if you're really worried about air quality in the house, windows closed, keeping air circulated within, right, recirculating air, and then an air purifier. I think I would try to do all those things before the mask. I think those provide better support.
That sounds like good advice. I love this one. Somebody's thinking outside the box and wants to know if there's any special plants that they could put in the house that will help with the air quality.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So I was doing this talk. This came up. It's the interesting story about this plants and whether they can really affect air quality. A lot of it was based on this study by this kind of NASA guy from the 80s who basically did some research around plants and thought maybe some volatile combustible particles might be reduced by plants. But honestly, that's been largely debunked. So I would, my short answer is no. There are some plants that can minimally improve air quality, not necessarily PM 2.5, but the amount of plants you would need for a room is just, you have to be living in like a rainforest. It's not truly feasible.
That's good. A couple more, if you don't mind. We have one person who said, let's see, I also open my windows during daytime to let my room breathe.
Yep.
Should I be concerned about any airborne COVID virus with the environmental flow?
No, I don't think so. I think COVID in general, that's a whole different topic, but just COVID kind of in the air without a vector, like a human nearby transmitting it is not particularly a big issue right now. So I would say if discussed the concern. I don't think there's really a significant concern about just COVID generally in the air.
Great. And this one's interesting. I didn't really know about breathing exercises, but they're asking if they did daily breathing exercises to offset air quality, would it strengthen your lung function?
Yeah, so I think breathing exercises for lung function are great, especially if you have underlying asthma or COPD. There's things like pursed lip breathing that can really help strengthen the diaphragm, strengthen the muscles that support the lungs. So those are great. And so I think if you do those exercises to strengthen the lung, that might, I wouldn't say protective, but that might give you more of a buffer, right? I think, doing breathing exercises, in an area obviously where there's pollutant or, that I don't know if that would really have a significant improvement right there, but just breathing exercises alone, especially if you have underlying disease, is always great.
Wonderful. And we do have somebody who is a performer outside, and she or he is saying that they have to perform when the AQI is in orange or red, specifically during the fire season, and can perform several hours with fog and haze and carbon monoxide fumes. Just wondering, how safe is this overall?
Yeah, that's a tough situation. Not knowing your underlying risks. I guess if you're a performer relatively, active and maybe like physically active, no underlying issues. I think red is tough, right? Especially if it's a few hours, that can be damaging. Just to kind of bring this to something that maybe is a little more granular for people. There've been some studies. So it was like a study from Berkeley, which tried to correlate the PM 2.5 levels to smoking, right? Cigarettes, and it's not the perfect study, but it give you kind of a base that a PM 2.5 level of 20 is about equal to like a cigarette. And so if you're in the red range, right, which if you go back to the slides correlates to a PM 2.5 level of anywhere from 50 to 150, right? If you assume the higher range, 150, we're talking about 7 or 8 cigarettes. And so that's tough. I'd be careful.
Good advice. And we also have somebody said, I don't need, I'm sorry, since N95s are not available, do K95 help?
Yeah. So any 95s our 95s or 100s are okay. Yeah.
Good. Well, on that, there is one person who said they came in a little late and wanted to know if they would be able to see this. And yes, it is being taped. And if you have registered, you'll have access to it. And we will also be promoting it. On that, do you have any other closing remarks before we conclude, Doctor?
No, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for everybody to come out today. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all who attended. We look forward to getting this information to you in a follow-up. Have a good day.